There has been a profound shift in relations between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. The significance of this cannot be understated, but it really appears it's gone largely unnoticed. This is bigger than U.S. sanctions and high-tech chips. This is bigger than the previous arrests of Chinese spies. This hits on something deeply held by the CCP as one of its core interests. It changes a really seemingly unspoken agreement in America to leave an issue untouched, and it was easy to miss. On May 26, 2 alleged Chinese spies were arrested by U.S. authorities. The Department of Justice said in a release that Chen and Feng were charged in a bribery scheme that was directed by the Chinese government. They face charges of conspiracy, bribery, and money laundering. But what matters most is the story behind these charges. These two, they were allegedly involved in a CC plot against Falun Gong right here in the United States. They're accused of trying to bribe an IRS official to go after an entity tied to Falun Gong practitioners in New York. This is a case not just about the CCP exporting really one of its largest human rights abuses right onto American soil. This is also a case of the American government taking a stand where they previously would not. And I'll explain. Here's the reason, folks. Falun Gong is one of the CCP's NoGo topics. If diplomats from any country in the world meet with their Chinese counterparts, they cannot even mention the name Falun Gong. If they do, the Chinese officials will get up and walk out of the room, and the negotiations come to an end right there. If business deals are held, if political deals are trying to be made, there's this quiet understanding behind the scenes. You cannot talk about the persecution of Falun Gong without damaging relations with the Chinese Communist Party. And I'll explain why this is, and why this recent charges really matters so much. Now, it's been an open secret for decades that the Chinese regime mobilizes overseas forces to persecute practitioners of Falun Gong. Many people really only recently learned about the Chinese police stations, you might have seen reports on it, operating outside of China, including right here in New York, in fact. Well, look, I have personally been investigating and exposing that exact spy network running for the CCP for the last 16 years. In fact, my career as an investigative journalist began in 2008 when I uncovered and exposed these Chinese police stations, the CCP ones, right here in New York City. Now at that time, that was just ahead of the Beijing Olympics in 2008. The CCP had launched a global operation to attack any critics of the regime. That included violent attacks on religious groups that are persecuted in China. In Chinese communities in New York, Chinatown, and in Flushing, this took the form of large groups of people, dozens of them, who began cursing, threatening to kill, and even physically beating Falun Gong practitioners in broad daylight on New York streets. Many of these people who they were attacking had escaped persecution in China. Through a multi-year-long investigation, I found the groups carrying out these attacks, they were from what are known as Tongs. These are Chinese fraternal organizations. Some of the ones involved in this, in fact, have members in the tens of thousands. Many of them, notably, also have ties to the triads, the Chinese mafia. In fact, I found that one of them, the Fuqing gang, which is one of the largest organized crime groups in the world, in fact, was tied to these attacks. My colleagues and I found also that the CCP had been targeting these organizations for recruitment and uncovered direct involvement in the attacks from the New York consulate of the Chinese Communist Party, including from then Consul General Peng Ke-yu. In fact, Peng Ke-yu was even caught in a recording where he admitted on record his involvement in this. And a branch of the CCP as well, known as the United Front Work Department, was also being used to orchestrate the violence directly from China. Now, over the next few years, I uncovered CCP operations to subvert American politicians, kickback campaigns where political contributions were being reimbursed through advertisements in Chinese state-affiliated news outlets. I exposed influence campaigns, political warfare operations, and even military programs of the CCP meant to attack and undermine the United States at its foundations. And all of this, my career on exposing this stuff, was interlinked through exposing the persecution of Falun Gong. And why was that? It's because the CCP used these networks for these same purposes. The CCP plotted to use its networks of foreign agents to export its human rights abuses, and that even got deeper. There were murder-for-profit operations in China involving the killing of dissidents for organ harvesting, Falun Gong being one of the main targets of that. This was also deeply tied into a pay-to-play system that had been established within the Chinese leadership. If you wanted to rise through the ranks of the CCP, you had to get blood on your hands. This was linked to an international system of murder and corruption. Even the CCP's operations of cyber attacks meant to steal America's innovation and the future wealth of our country was tied into its export of human rights abuses. Shockingly, the American government did very little in response to all this. But these recent arrests suggest that something may have changed. Look, for the Chinese Communist Party, Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is regarded as a key threat to the regime. And why is that? Well, it's a threat because they're being persecuted, and because the persecution against Falun Gong has largely failed. People are not giving up their beliefs, even in the face of torture and death. Many police in China are even now refusing to carry out the persecution because it has failed. Now, before the persecution began in 1999, Falun Gong was actually praised for its health benefits. It was recognized for encouraging good values and for really starting a culture of good Samaritans throughout the country. The practice includes meditation exercises that resemble Tai Chi. It also includes a focus on moral refinement based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Falun Gong practitioners are trying to be good people, and they're being persecuted for it. It's as simple as that. The persecution was launched by former CCP leader Jiang Zemin, and it was launched because it was found that there were an estimated 100 million people practicing Falun Gong in China. Jiang Zemin declared it was a threat to the atheistic rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Jiang gave orders, notably, to eradicate Falun Gong, and that included mass campaigns of arrest, torture, slave labor, and live organ harvesting for profit. The problem for the CCP, however, is this. The regime never had a real reason to persecute Falun Gong, so what did it do? Well, it manufactured fake information to vilify the practice, and then broadcasted that fake information 24/7 in China. And then it used its networks of control to even spread that fake news meant to excuse a genocide to media outside of China. But since the regime's leadership knew that they were torturing and killing innocent people, this created a culture of fear among the CCP elite. They feared retribution. And so as a remedy to this, what did they do? They created a kind of blood pact. Anyone who wanted to rise through the ranks of the regime needed to get blood on their hands, because they all needed to be guilty together. And only that way could they feel secure that they would not face justice from within the party. They were all guilty. But there was always another problem. The persecution was built on lies. These lies are delicate, and the lies are easily debunked. And if the world found out, well, the CCP leaders could also face justice for their crimes, including the genocide of Falun Gong. And so what did they do? They used cyber attacks to shut down Falun Gong websites outside of China. They used money and influence to ensure that foreign news outlets would not tell the truth. And they used corruption and diplomatic pressure to make Falun Gong a no-go topic in any debates. They silenced the world. It's also a crucial reason, notably, that the Epoch Times was founded by Chinese Americans to tell the world the truth that could not be spoken elsewhere. Public officials in the United States now have taken increasingly strong stances against the Chinese Communist Party's persecutions. And that includes open condemnations of live organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. They begin to speak out about it. But that's different from justice, different from the CCP leadership facing punishment for crimes against humanity. And justice is what the CCP leaders fear the most. These recent arrests suggest that Falun Gong is no longer a no-go topic, in particular when it comes to justice. And for the CCP, this sends a message that justice may be coming.